Okay, hi everybody. This is video 4. This is for year 1 and year 2. So I am doing this video in response to a lot of the questions that I received from the video prompt on Aquinas. And this is going to be a two-parter. We're going to start off with talking about evolution, and then next week I'm going to talk about reading the Bible and making sense out of the book of Genesis, essentially the creation stories, because that was where a lot of your questions came from. So just diving right in, 4.1 billion years ago, earliest life appears. 3.5 billion years ago, photosynthesis begins in bacteria. 2.5 billion years ago, there's the first evidence of atmospheric oxygen. Okay, so this is a long time ago. All right, we haven't existed that long. But these are some of the scientific advancements that we have made so far, that we have been able to establish a timeline for when the earliest life appeared, 4.1 billion years ago. Now, back about 70 years ago, Pope Pius, about 70 years ago, that's when evolution, Darwinism, and everything was kind of coming on the scene. People didn't know anything about evolution at that time. And what Pope Pius said is that there is no opposition between faith and the theory of evolution. What you cannot believe is that you are just a pile of atoms and cells. That's what you can't believe. You must believe that you are important and that you are from God and that you have a soul. So that's what Pope Pius said. You are completely free to believe in evolution. You are completely free to pay very good attention in your biology classes, and because it's legit, evolution happened. So when we start to talk about like earliest forms of life, it all started, they found these tiny little tubes in Canadian rocks that were in the form of rust, and that is what we understand to be like some of the earliest form of life. Plants about 0.475 billion years ago, they came on the scene as non-vascular, which means they don't have veins in them, and then they developed into vascular plants. But as far as we go, about 20 million years ago, our earliest ancestor developed. So the genus is Homo, and this genus is Homo. So it goes from like Homo, I can't even say all the words, Homo ruca something. We're Homo sapiens, that's us. But that's our earliest known ancestor is about 20 million years ago. So there was a jawbone found in Africa, and this is kind of how they like came to see like how our skulls developed about 170,000 years ago, and that jawbone is what helped them kind of see the development of the human skull and everything. Now, something happened in the development of people as we know us. So modern people like you and like me, they came on the scene about 80,000 years ago. So this is a huge hot spot for biologists, anthropologists, and archaeologists in Africa and places like that, because something just happened with the human brain. And what they called it is behavioral modernity. I can never say that word. Behavioral modernity. Modern human. Something happened to our brains, basically. And this is where I would put the argument. This is where we got our souls. At this genetic switch that nobody really understands what happens, this is where we got a soul. Now, Father Spitzer, he is a Jesuit priest. He does so many amazing videos on this. They're a little advanced, like I don't understand half of them. But he talks about this topic pretty in depth. So if you're interested in that, I can definitely forward you some information, because that's where I got a lot of my information from. So something happened about 80,000 years ago. Modern people began to do weird stuff. They started creating art. They created tools with blade technology, so knives and spears. They began to migrate out of like the little Africa area. They began to go in different parts of the world. And then one of the weirdest things that they did was they began burying their dead, and not just burying their dead, but burying their dead with concerns for what was going to happen to them in the afterlife. And that's weird. Biologically, it is very strange for the advancement of a person to go from, just basically like survival techniques, if you want to think about like the way that orangutans behave, survival techniques. They feed themselves, they sleep, they take care of their family. That's essentially it. Something switching over to in your brain to where you now became concerned for the dead. So there's a linguist, and linguists are people that study language, Noam Chomsky, and one of the things he said that occurred at this behavioral switch during behavioral modernity is that the human mind became genetically coded to understand syntax. So it was evolutionary for us to understand language. So what syntax is the arrangements of a word in a sentence. So grandma ate cookie versus cookie ate grandma relies on syntax for you to understand. The cookie did not eat your grandmother ate the cookie. But if I say cookie ate grandma, you're going to take it as, oh, that cookie ate my grandma. That's syntax. Now, there are so many different ways that you can form a sentence, and if with proper and improper English. For example, my nephew, he wanted a glass of tea, but he was trying to let me know that nobody else wanted tea. He was little, and he was saying, don't nobody want no tea. Nobody wants tea. There isn't tea anybody who wants tea. Nobody don't want no tea. And he kept trying to tell me nobody wants tea. I got it. But children know how to communicate this. They pick up on syntax. And additionally, if you say to a child, dog bit dad, he'll probably, recoil a bit, like grimace. But if you say dad bit dog, the child would probably laugh, the small kid. And any of you that have little siblings know that's true. We begin to understand syntax. Now, additionally, and a lot of you, I know that English is not the first language for a lot of your parents, or even maybe for you, but you could take a small child, a 3 or 4-year-old that only has ever known English, drop them in China, drop them in Mexico, drop them, who else, in Russia. They will learn the proper language. Because, and this was what Noam Chomsky was arguing, is that there is something genetic in people that helps them understand language. So there's also another difference between us and animals. So if you there's 2 types of reasoning, deductive and inductive reasoning. If I bring you a bag and I pull out a penny, put it on the table, pull out a penny, put it on the table, pull out a penny, put it on the table. Inductively, you are going to understand that bag's probably filled with pennies. Our pets do this all the time. Rocky knows without being able to see, and he's my German Shepherd, he knows without being able to see inside of this jar, he knows that jar is filled with his treats. Because every single time I've ever reached into that jar, he's gotten a treat. Inductively, animals can learn, people can learn. The difference is deductively, animals don't think that way. They don't produce a hypothesis, examine possibilities, and draw a logical conclusion. Further, they do not understand syntaxical language. So there was a guy named Herbert Terrace, and he wanted to challenge Noam Chomsky on this idea that English is evolutionary, or not English, language is evolutionary. So what he did is he got chimps. One of the chimps, he named Nim Chimpsky as like a mockery for Noam Chomsky, to argue against this LAD theory, this theory that language is part of our genetic development. And what he did is he raised Nim, the little chimp, as his human child, because so chimps share 98.7% of our DNA. We are that closely related. So he communicated with Nim through sign language and raised him with affection every single day. And he was able to learn about 125 sign language words. However, Nim could never understand syntax. As we said before, dog bites man, man bites dog. He never could understand the difference between those sentences. So this is just one study. There are so many different studies that have been focused on language, but one of the things that has been conclusive across the board is that we're the only species that can understand syntax, and there is something genetically modified within our brains that make us different from every other species. So some of the other things that are a little bit interesting about people, we are the only species that wears clothes. We blush, which I hate because I'm a blusher. When you get embarrassed, you get red. We have extremely long childhoods, and that's for your brain development because your brains are different than everybody else. And then one of the other more interesting things is after childbearing, all other animals will die. Once an animal can no longer bear children, they die. People tend to live when they're beyond childbearing, at least for women. Women can, they're probably about 50 years old. They can't have kids anymore. They'll live for like another 40 years. No other species will do that. So one of the questions, why would people desire to worship, and why would that be a part of our evolutionary journey? Keep in mind, this is before Christianity. So there's like no Jesus on the scene, no church, nothing like that, no Jewish religions. People developed language, started moving around, started to worship. They had this desire to worship. Why would that be part of our evolutionary history? The thing is, you are each evolutionarily hardwired with a soul and with a desire for God. Now, neurologists, this is something we talked about in our in-person class a little bit. Neurologists have studied the brain in relation to what happens to the brain normally and what happens to the brain when you're praying or meditating. And one of the things that happens when you pray is your brain releases oxytocin. If you're not familiar with what oxytocin is, when a woman has a baby and she's holding the baby or feeding the baby, her brain releases oxytocin. Additionally, the baby's brain releases oxytocin, and what that does is it causes a bond between the two of them. Your brain has these chemicals on standby that say, all right, a bond needs to take place here, and it releases it. So that's why a mother bonds with her children. Even in situations of immense abuse, when a mother is abusive to a child, the child is still bonded with the mother. It doesn't matter. That oxytocin releases. The exact same thing happens when you pray. Your brain releases oxytocin. Your brain releases bonding chemicals. And there's a reason for that. So another thing that's interesting that they studied is when you're praying, your brain will actually So another interesting thing that happens when you're praying or meditating, they found in this NYU study, is that they did MRI scans on alcoholics, and they showed them images of alcoholic drinks, and certain parts of their brain lit up where they were really craving alcohol. But if the person prayed while being shown the images, the desire, the parts of the brain for desire and seeking actually lessened. Now, there's an Aristotle quote that says, asking questions is the beginning of all knowledge and creativity. If you had no awareness of perfect knowledge, you would not recognize imperfections in your current knowledge. And so you would have no desire to ask questions. You would not even be aware that there are things to ask questions about. So very small children can recognize imperfections. When we talk about love that isn't authentic, a small child can recognize inauthentic love. My dog is not bothered by inauthentic love. He does love me. He cares about me, but he just wants me to feed him. Okay? He can be bought with food. That's my dog. He can be bought with food. When people are inauthentic in love, we don't act like our real selves. Each of you has more than likely experienced that in your life where you knew people didn't love you truly, like deep down. So you behaved a different way. You behaved the way you thought people might want you to behave. I remember when I first started dating my husband back in high school. We've been together since high school. He was really into sports. I pretended I was into sports. I could care less. I will just be honest with you. I do not care about football. I do not care about basketball. I don't care about baseball. I detest baseball. There are too many games played in baseball. Anyway, but you don't act like yourself. And we constantly love each other inauthentically. We recognize the flaws in other people. We don't accept other people's flaws. And regardless of constantly experiencing imperfect love, we still crave it. Every single one of you wants to be loved authentically. One of the things that struck me is when you sent me your 10-year plan, many of you singled that out. Like, I want to be truly in love with somebody and get married. We seek this authentic love, even though in human relationships, we really have not experienced it. Additionally, every single one of you naturally notices unfairness. My dog, he can notice unfairness if I give a treat to another animal and he doesn't get it. He kind of cocks his head to the side, like, what is this crap? But he doesn't like long for justice. He's more like ticked off, like, woman, give me a bone. But each and every single one of you notice unfairness or the lack of goodness in others, or the lack of goodness in ourselves, or institutions, or organizations, or political parties, and you want them to be perfect. You want justice. You want goodness in everything. Every single one of you also seeks perfect beauty. So some of you have shared stories in the past where you have just been in like this awe-striking moment where, whether it was like a sunset or flowers or something like that, where you just were exposed to this beauty that was just amazing. But natural to us, we start to pick it apart and recognize that it isn't actually perfect beauty. Like, I love flowers. So I was looking, I'll look at the roses in my garden and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing ever created. And then you'll see that one of the leaves one of the petals is torn and another one is a little bit brown. We notice those things. And for some reason, we notice when beauty is imperfect. So one of the other questions is, have you ever experienced emptiness or loneliness? Or have you ever felt like you were not completely at home in the world? Have you ever felt like something was missing? Even in my happiest moments, I just honestly have never had a feeling of being settled. I have never felt like I'm perfectly content here. I've never had that feeling. And again, we have this desire for a perfect home where we feel like we fit perfectly, where we don't feel restless. Augustine has this famous quote about God that says, my heart will be restless until it rests in you. So this longing for perfect truth, perfect love, perfect beauty, perfect goodness, and perfect being or perfect home, these are what are called transcendentals. And these are natural inclinations that every single one of you have, and they are not a mistake. They are something that biologically came into your brain. They are part of you now, and as we discussed earlier, science is making amazing advancements with trying to understand the how things happened. But the why portion of it, not so much. Why do you long for perfection? Why do you long for perfect justice? Why do you long for this perfect love, even though you have never once with a human companion experienced perfect love? There are certain things that are just in your character, in your personality, naturally. So the questions that I'm going to give you guys a list of questions that you're allowed to answer in this video prompt. You can take one and answer it. You can take all of them if you feel so desire, but please, please, please do not just send me one sentence. It has to be about 200 words. Some of you have been knocking it out of the park, but from this point forward, if it's not at least 200 words, it doesn't count. So you got to answer with 200 words. So here's your questions. Do you believe that you are different from the rest of creation? Do you believe that you are different from the rest of creation? Do you believe that you have a soul? So, next question. What was the closest that you have ever been to experiencing perfect beauty? Next, is there anything else you can think of that is uniquely human? You know, I gave you the examples of people blush, people wear clothes. Is there anything you can think about that is just very uniquely human, something we do that other species don't do? Have you ever felt like you just don't fit? As I said, me literally every day, every minute, right now. Don't feel like I fit. Just unsettled, usually all the time. But yeah, so have you ever felt like you don't fit? Have you ever had an experience where you received love that was imperfect, or you gave love that was imperfect? And lastly, has prayer ever helped you during a bad situation? So like I said, you can take one, all, none. Just respond to this video in some way. Remember, it has to be 200 words. Send it to bowens@ctkparishfs.com. And I look forward to your responses. So if any of you have any other questions, please feel free just to throw those in there. I think that's about it. So, all right. See you all in another week. Bye.